Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here representing Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and today I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about the inconclusive and conflicting research on training frequency and muscle growth. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, be greatly appreciated. If you're not subscribed or following, please do so, and if you'll be kind enough to drop me a comment down below, I'd appreciate it so much. Thank you. Look, I'm someone who's run the full spectrum of this stuff in terms of what I use, what I promote, what I coach, and I'm well known for early on most of my honestly fitness content creator career promoting fairly high frequencies. Although I did go over for a while and mess with body part splits and push pull legs and have clients who run those things. I historically tended to be a pretty high frequency full body guy or like 4-day conjugate. Pretty much for the overwhelming majority. And I always went off of the old school stuff that number one, full body 3 day a week was literally how all the champions trained before steroids became mainstream. Okay. It's how all the natural champions trained successfully, the ones who were winning. They didn't even care about splitting or any of this stuff. And honestly, even the early gear users. So until anabolics came in vogue, no one cared about splitting stuff up, right? No one cared about it. And the argument then was made later that, we had studies coming out showing, look, muscle protein synthesis stops, within 48 hours. Okay. And I did see one study done on women that showed that myofibrillar growth stopped within 48, but sarcoplasmic could go up to 72. We saw all this stuff, and then so the point was, well, maybe all the anabolics are extending to muscle protein synthesis, so the body part splits worked just fine. And this has come into a lot of question. That was a lot of preliminary data, and then I had kind of said, hey guys, this is the reason I recommend this, and I'm not saying you can't make gains on body part splits. You certainly can, although they tend to work obviously better for guys on hefty amounts of gear who want to just come in and annihilate a body part. And that was generally the prevailing thought, was that if you're going to use stuff, you can recover from the higher volumes per session, and you're going to extend the muscle protein synthesis anyway. So recovery meaning at the individual muscle level, not your system. But even then, when I was at probably my most jacked, not necessarily leanest, but most jacked, I was still doing full body 3 day a week. And I thought that was fascinating, right around early 40s in terms of jacked while being, putting out content, and I switched over to other stuff, obviously. And then data started coming out, and I had said at some point, look, I know guys who've gotten brutally strong, like high level powerlifters doing literally a squat, bench, deadlift day. And we've seen plenty of that, but they were also all on gear, by the way. Right? Not necessarily hefty amounts, though. That was the interesting thing. So what came out later, we started seeing studies, and we've seen guys like Schoenfeld produce studies showing, look, as long as volume is equated, frequency doesn't matter for muscle growth. Okay? Here's the problem with all of these studies. Exercise science in terms of muscle growth is not the best science, right? They have low sample sizes, poor selection, they're too short. And I'm not saying we can't draw anything from them. I'm just saying all of it, we have to approach it with caution. We have to approach it with extreme caution. And I pointed out, look, a lot of these studies and some of these meta-analysis are saying, based on their data, that, frequency doesn't matter as long as volume is equated. The problem is with some of that, though, is that we have a lot of these conflicting studies, showing total sets with a reduced muscle growth. For example, we had at least one study coming out of Brazil where when they did control groups exceeding, for some muscles, exceeding 5 sets a week caused less growth. And all muscle groups exceeding 10, like in a single workout, apparently, right? Muscle growth stopped, meaning not only stopped, it regressed. In other words, people who did some of the muscle groups, what we saw was that 5 produced more growth than 10. Some of them 10 produced more than 5, but in every single one of those cases, doing 15 or 20 produced less growth than 5 or 10 from a single session. So we definitely have data that when no drugs are in the mix, and these were women who usually have a higher volume tolerance, right? So this really creates some conflicts of saying, well, just sheer volume, because when we're looking at the individual sessions, at least there were a couple studies that did this, but then not much further went into that, you know. But at least it indicates from those that, hey, there's definitely an upper threshold to where not only muscle growth stops in a session, it may be detrimental. And I have to wonder, even for me, look at the amount of sessions I did with 20 sets of biceps in a workout, or 15, you know, and ultimately my biceps didn't get bigger. My biceps were bigger when I did nothing but pull-ups in the previous years. So again, just pointing some of that out. You know, using myself as an example, my thighs and my squats tended to be biggest when I didn't do more than 6 sets for legs in a single session. Like literally when I was hitting 550 and 600 squats with different bars, that's how I trained. The problem we come into, though, is that then there's conflicting data. I've seen Beardsley recently produce lots and lots of studies showing that when volume is equaled, higher frequency, double or even two sessions a week is producing more muscle growth, right? And a lot of it has to do with the way muscles detrain. And I've seen him point that out. People have this idea that muscles don't shrink. Well, apparently some of the data is showing muscles can literally start to atrophy within a few days of the last training session, okay, for that muscle. And he's got pretty good data to back that. So we run into conflicting data. You know, we run into conflicting data, and it's at the point where I look at it and say, look, people can make gains on all these different systems. And if you enjoy a body part split or push-pull legs more, you recover more, your joints feel really good, and you're motivated to train, I feel like that psychological motivation could be worth more than any possible muscle protein synthesis. But, you know, if I still go with my gut instinct and my hunch and the way old school guys trained very successfully before drugs, you know, I'm still going to tend to say, look, that 3-day full body, which is how I train again these days, may be the way to go, particularly from an organizational standpoint. And I think it flows, as I've said before, really well for people who may have to miss a workout or half a week of training, because you'll have the least detraining from each muscle. Every muscle is going to be stimulated all the time, and there's probably way less risk of, you know, excessive junk volume for a muscle in any given session. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.